Thanks for listening to Local SEO today. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode. Joining me today is Will Critchlow. He founded online marketing agency Distilled in 2005 and started Searchlove Conference in 2009. This year, he founded Search Pilot for SEO A/B testing. Thanks for being on the show, Will.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Well, I'm excited because you're joining me all the way from England. And for me, I know we're going through a lot right now, right, in the world situation. How have you been dealing with what the turmoil, the unrest, like what's going on in your world over there?
Yeah, well, so I think the main thing to say is I feel very lucky that, that our personal situation has gone pretty well. We are lucky enough to have some outdoor space. So even in the depths of full-on lockdown, the kids could get some exercise. Families safe and well, and those kinds of things. So that being said, yes, it's been quite a year, and I think what we've noticed, all of the kind of those personal impacts on our own mental well-being, families, our teams, and obviously the impact on the business as well. I think we're very lucky that, I guess most people in our industry were able to work from home, and so operationally it's been fine. We can do everything from home that we would be able to do from the office. So it is much more about that, A, the mental health, and B, just all of the other demands. When folks have kids that they're having to homeschool. My kids were home for a good few months earlier on. They're back at school now, and that was tough. Juggling the kids' needs with the fact that I think probably April and May were perhaps the worst of it in terms of business uncertainty, where you just didn't know. I don't think anybody knew what the next shoe to drop would look like, which clients were going to continue working, which weren't, whether there's any new business coming, how long we might be in this situation for, all of those kinds of things. So it's definitely been a challenging year, but we've come through it. Both bits of the business have recovered nicely. Obviously, conferences, we're not back to in-person conferences yet, but we will be, and everything else has rebounded nicely for us. So again, feel very lucky on that front.
Amazing. So I know a little bit about you, but maybe share with the audience member about your journey and maybe go way back to like your studies and your career path.
Yeah, well, so actually it probably even starts before my studies. So I think the journey begins in the 90s. So I don't know what the average age of our audience here is, but I'm guessing I'm older now than I used to be the one of the young kids in the industry, and it's funny how you go from being the youngster to being the veteran, seemingly overnight. But so I went through my kind of teenage years in the 90s and remember the kind of the early days of the web and us getting our first internet access and those kinds of things at home and at school. And myself and my co-founder, Duncan Morris, so the two of us founded Distilled, as you said, in 2005. Yep. We actually met in about 91, 92 at school. And we started building websites together along with some of our other friends in the late 90s, or mid to late 90s, 96, 97, something like that. And that was a fascinating time to be doing anything with the web, right? Barely anyone was online compared to today. And the tools were terrible and the things we built were terrible. But at the same time, it was a new frontier and it was exciting and it was interesting. We were learning all the time. And so there's kind of that bit, which is, I guess, the seed was planted. And so that was the seed of the technology side. I think the seed of the entrepreneurial side was probably, my dad worked from home. He was ran his own business for almost as long as I can remember. I just about remember the last time he commuted in the early 80s. So then we talked actually about kind of building a business together, Duncan and I, then, so 98, 99. And in the end, decided that we were going to go to university and get some more education and those kinds of things, which I'm very, very glad we did. We had wonderful university experiences, but I've always kind of wondered what would have happened because we'd have gone through the whole .com boom and bust, right? Which we pretty much sat out, right? Because 98 to 2002 was kind of my university journey. And that's obviously the big spike and big drop. And we used to brainstorm all these kind of crazy ideas that then you'd read in the newspaper that, that exact idea has just had $10 million of funding or whatever. And then, of course, a few weeks later, the business is bust or all those kind of things. So we graduated into, I think, probably the worst jobs market until the global financial crisis a decade later. But we were both lucky enough to find jobs straight out of university. So we moved to London. So again, that was the next milestone where we thought about picking up what we'd been doing, starting a business then, and it would have been the same kind of thing, building websites. But we wanted to move to London, couldn't afford to do both things. So we got jobs working for the man and did that for a couple of years and then essentially realized that, or decided that if we were going to do this thing, that was the time. Because in 2005, we were 25. We didn't have kids yet. We weren't married yet. We were renting. We could really dial back our expenses, our personal expenses, and live quite frugally for a time, which was good because, I think the first year we made less money than in total revenue than either of us had made in salary previously, and so it was quite a long, slow ramp up. So we started building websites. Then we moved into SEO. Initially for the people whose websites we built, small local businesses, typically, local hairdresser, the pub, the physiotherapist. Like I remember these people's names because I went door to door selling to them. Basically, they were all up and down our local high street, and that gave us kind of the confidence. Doing that for 100 odd small businesses gave us the confidence that we were doing things that were valuable, things that worked, and that. I remember we went to some conferences in the mid 2000s, 2006, 2007, and actually found them very confident. They gave us a lot of confidence because actually we found that we did know a lot of this stuff. That there wasn't another level deeper that we'd had no access to. Obviously, we were still learning things, but it wasn't like there was a secret that nobody had told us yet. And so. Around that time, we started offering SEO services as a kind of standalone offering, so to people whose websites we hadn't built, and that was an overnight change in the business because suddenly we could start consulting for much larger organizations, larger websites, where there was a limit to how big a website our small team could build, right? And we pretty much hit that limit. We were kind of bumping up on selling, websites that cost mid 5 figures, maybe. And to go much bigger than that, you really need a much bigger team, right? You need separate skills in all of the different areas. You need project managers. You need all this kind of layers of stuff that rather than build that, we kind of got into the consulting side of things. And so, that was our kind of entry into the scene. And we started trying to build a name for ourselves and get known for organic search. And we carried on building websites for another couple of years, but then gradually that died away. And then, as you said, we started up the conferences, and a few years later, the software that ended up spinning out as Searchpilot.
That's amazing. I love the journey because people don't understand what it takes, right? People think it's an overnight success, right? They hear
it's an overnight success a decade or two after you start.
Exactly, right? But that's what people want to hear. They're in their 20s and they're like hopes and dreams. This person looks young. Like, Will, you look like you're in your 20s. Yet alone, you're probably in your 40s, right? Or that's close to it.
I am in my 40s now, and exactly. I think there's a big element of businesses. There's a lot of mystery and mysticism that surrounds different kinds of business ventures, and I think some of it you need the naivety of having no idea what you're doing. Otherwise, maybe you wouldn't get into it. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
We kind of. I remember actually we built a business model, a business plan, a spreadsheet of what we thought our performance might be in these before we even started. And we couldn't quite make the numbers work. So we were like, if we make this many cold calls, we send this many letters out, we do this much kind of direct mail, maybe our conversion rate will be like this. If I go door to door like this, I'll meet this many people, maybe we'll sell this many websites, maybe we can charge however many hundred or how many £1,000 per website. And we couldn't make it work in the spreadsheet. And then we kind of said, oh, well, should we just give it a try and see if we can do better than the spreadsheet suggests. And I don't, even looking back, I'm kind of like, that's a really interesting mental model. Like, how do we take that step from going, I can't even make this work in the spreadsheet, to, well, let's just give it a try. And I think there is value in doing it at a time in your life when you can take those risks. And we were obviously in a very lucky situation as well, where we weren't saddled with big personal debts, those kinds of things. We didn't have a big bankroll behind us. I think we'd each saved enough to buy a laptop and pay our rent for a month or two.
I love that.
But we did need it to work. Like we didn't have any other source of income. But we were privileged enough not to be underwater when we started. So I realized that's quite different to many other people. But you read about, at the time, as I said, we were reading a lot about the boom and bust of the .com era. These days, I think the equivalent would be, I mean, it's still TechCrunch, right? But certainly a decade ago, it would have been TechCrunch. And there's a lot of, you read about the stats of the percentage of businesses that fail. And I think a lot of that I think that happens at both ends of that spectrum. But at one end, it's people give up. And that's not always a bad thing, right? They might just realize that this life is not for them, right? The roller coaster of being an entrepreneur is not for them. And that counts as a business failure or a business shutdown, right? In the statistics. And at the other extreme, you've got the explosions of raised 100 million in VC, then went bust. And that's a very different kind of failure as well. And the individuals are probably fine, right? They go on to the next thing. But I think people should have their eyes open to which of these things, what they're shooting for. And I really recommend actually Rand Fishkin's book, Lost and Founder.
Oh yeah.
I think everybody early in that
for
journey,
agency, yeah.
Yeah, well, for basically any kind of business, really, just and especially if you're thinking of raising outside money, which I've never really been on that. I've never worked in a VC-backed business, but plenty of our clients and customers have been. And the company that acquired Distilled is private equity backed, so at least I've kind of seen some of that financial discipline and the need to create returns for external shareholders. But I think. Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, it isn't overnight. I think the nice thing about that is, and I've seen this with a lot of my friends and peers around the industry. If you do slog away, if you commit to this and you slog away at it for a decade, you will get somewhere, right? You will get somewhere interesting. It may not be venture-sized returns. I think those are rare, and you have to know that going into it. But the chances that you can build a solid, profitable business that will pay you good money and set your family up well and employ people and be a valuable part of the community, like that's actually much, much higher if you can commit to it for a decade plus.
Yeah. And I think you hit it right on the nail, like lifestyle business, which supports your people, your family, your staff, and you can commit, right? The big thing is people lose faith, they give up early. And the challenge is a lot of people have misconceptions, right? They already have a real high expectation and they already have a timeline, which is personal motivation, which is fine. But reality is it usually takes way longer and you're going to get paid way less than anyone ever tells you in a book, in a video, because they're only showing you the top 0.0001% of the people that were successful. Everyone else is struggling, right? Everyone is trying to make it.
Well, and I think the secret is actually that even the successful people are struggling. Like it's hard, right? It's hard. And the timelines are long, even on the things that are genuinely much closer to overnight successes. That actually, you look at the timeline of how long ago they actually got started, or when that founder feels like they started that journey, and inevitably it's that few years earlier, right? So what looks like 3 years was actually 7, and those are, it's all very well to say I can commit to doing this for a few years, but a year is a long time. And so I don't know. I think it is that commitment, that going for the journey, enjoying the ride is a big part of it.
And a lot of people who are, say, working right now in the SEO industry, and they want to move ahead to be more of a consultant, to then start their own agency. that mindset, that shift from employee, from just doing their daily tasks and activities, to then build a team, to then have customers, then bookkeeping, finance, accounting, then sales, marketing background, customer service, then operations, systems, procedures, process. Like, it's a whole new like subset of skills, right? And that's where a lot of people in the agency world don't get, right? Like, yes, you're great as a consultant, you're great as a freelancer, or someone that's already doing one certain aspect, like link build or strategy or content or whatever. But when you then try to embed everything together as an agency and then deliver really good results for clients and you're accountable, that's where a lot of people like, they give up, right? Like there's a lot of failure in that space. So
yeah, that's true. And although I would say like, I think some of stopping doing that shouldn't really be classified as failure, right? That some of that is discovering
exactly
what you want to do, discovering
what's fit for you.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. And yeah, that might get classified on the books as a business failure, but actually it can just be moving on, and it certainly doesn't have to be a personal failure. I think, I remember going to a talk. It was a few years into running our business, so we were pretty much committed to hiring people and growing the team by this point, which is probably good because it was a talk that was essentially trying to talk you out of doing that, which was saying, I remember he had this very vivid description of the valley of death, he called it, which was, he essentially plotted a chart where the y-axis was individual entrepreneurs annual take home pay, and the x-axis was number of employees. And he just drew this valley, and he said, that if you're very good at almost anything as a one-man band, as an individual consultant, there's a very good chance you can earn six figures, right? Whether that's as a plumber, as an SEO consultant, as a financial planner, like wedding planner, whatever it is, like there are ways of earning good money out on your own. As soon as you start hiring people, that number starts dropping. And the scary thing is how long it takes to turn the corner, but not only that, how long it takes to get back up above
what you were making,
where you could have started. And I think we were lucky because we actually didn't start at the top of that curve, right? We were coming out of entry-level graduate jobs, and we hadn't made a name yet for ourselves in the industry as individual consultants. I was actually listening, I don't know if you know Stephen Pavlovich, founder of conversion.com. I was listening to a podcast that he was on actually this morning on a dog walk, and he recently sold his business, and he did the other way around. So he was a highly compensated, well-known individual consultant first, who then built out an agency. And he was telling it from his perspective. But from our perspective, that slope was always upwards for us. I think each year we could pay ourselves a little bit better, and we weren't comparing back to when we were an individual freelancer or well-known individual consultant, because we'd never done that. We didn't do it that way round. So again, that was another bit of fortuitous thing that let us go on that slog. Because I think if we'd built that up first, built up the individual consulting business first, and then had to make that jump to say, actually, I'm taking this massive pay cut to hire a team, and gone on that journey, that would have been probably a lot harder to stomach.
And I think everyone has their own personal journey, right? And for you, it sounds pretty remarkable where it was a grind, right? But that's how you're always trying to learn and make mistakes, right? Like everyone understands that as an entrepreneur, you're never going to be perfect right off the bat. And you're going to continually trying to understand, learn, make mistakes, and, try to pivot or adapt to the situation, economy, whatever the customer demands, right? Like, but that's, if you're enjoying the process, pursue it, continue. But if you don't even want to continue waking up and doing what you love, like, don't do it. Find something that you're more passionate doing, right?
For sure. I definitely come back a lot to another quote that I remember is from the book The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Which is more about the VC-backed world and the kind of intense pressures that brings. But the line that I think applies no matter what kind of business you're building is about seeking to enjoy the journey. I think he calls it enjoy the game. And that really resonated with me and has resonated with me over the years. It's like in the vast majority of cases, especially in our industry, in kind of, you know, a space where there are quite a lot of jobs where you could go and work for somebody else's agency, or you could work in house, or you could, you know, there's people have options. It's like, remember, nobody made you be an entrepreneur. Nobody made you start this business. You know, these are your choices.
Exactly.
And then seeking deliberately to make the most of that, and remember that, and remind yourself that this is the game that you've chosen, and so you might as well enjoy it to the best of your ability. And I think the kind of grind changes. So, you know, there's the grind of day one where you've got to do your own bookkeeping, is one kind of, you know, yes, you're doing data entry, right? Minimum wage kind of stuff. There's the kind of grind where things just aren't going your way, you know, and it feels like you're putting a lot of effort in, either standing on the spot, or even worse, going backwards. And that happens, you know, repeatedly through the lives of, I think, any agency journey, probably any business journey, through to the kind of the genuinely really hard things, right? You know, having to fire someone or lay someone off, or you know, do performance manage things, or deal with a very difficult client situation, or worry about financial stress in the business, or for your team. And you can't enjoy all those things exactly, but you can kind of at least acknowledge the fact that you put yourself in the situation, and you're learning from it, and you'll come out of it stronger.
So it's amazing to hear someone that's seasoned like yourself being just, you know, open about the journey, right? Because a lot of people need to understand this, need to hear it from someone that now runs a conference and enjoys what they're doing, but goes through this entire process, right? Over the years, did you ever hire like mentors or coaches, and how has that really helped or impacted you in any way?
Yeah, we've had a couple of different kinds of relationships with people who've been pivotal in different ways. So I think probably the earliest one I remember actually was the other way around. He paid us. So it was one of our earliest customers, earliest clients, became an amazing mentor for us over the years. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago, but he, and I wrote this whole story up actually on my personal website at willcritchlow.com. There's the story of how I met Richard Denny. Basically, the summary of it quickly is that he'd done many things. He was a successful businessman in a number of areas, but one of the things he'd done is he'd written a book called Selling to Win. So he was a salesman himself initially, and then he'd become a sales coach, and then a more general business coach. And he'd written this book called Selling to Win, and it had a lime green cover, really, really striking lime green cover. And a month or two before we started the business that would become Distilled, my co-founder and I went on a kind of last family holiday together. We figured that it would be some time before we could both go on holiday at the same time again. And so the two of us and our girlfriends, now wives, went away for a week.
Nice.
And we were in the airport waiting to go. And we were talking about the fact that the thing we knew least about this business that we were about to start was sales. And you know, we knew about the technology, we knew about a reasonable amount about kind of like managing clients and those kinds of things. I'd worked as a consultant. We knew about the finances. Again, I'd worked in kind of finance consulting. We didn't really know about sales. Neither of us had ever sold really anything. Certainly nothing worth more than £100 or something. And so we said we should buy a book. So we went to the airport bookstore and picked out this bright green book, and we both read it on that trip. And we said, well, you know, this is good. It sounds right. It sounds interesting. This guy writes well. It sounds like a legitimate process. But it might all be bullshit. Like, how would we know if this guy's for real? And we said, well, you know, the way to test it is to sell something to him using his process. And if it works, then we'll know that he's for real. And that's a good stress test, we figured, because everybody must do this, right? Every joker must read this guy's book and then try and sell him something. But actually, it turns out, he said nobody had ever tried that before. So we literally followed his exact process. We wrote him a letter, which didn't try and sell him anything. It just tried to get him on the phone. We picked up the phone and called him with the sole purpose of getting a meeting. Didn't try and sell him anything on the phone. We got a train in the middle of the night, felt like, because he was way out in the countryside. Went out there and signed a contract to redesign his website for him.
That's amazing.
And we told him, later that what we were doing, and said, doesn't everybody try this? And he said, like, no, that was part of the reason that I kind of went with you kids, because you were the first people with the initiative to do that. And anyway, he became a great mentor over the years.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, he helps a lot. Then, yeah, and we did pay for various bits of advice. The ones that stand out, we had somebody tell us to rebrand in our first year. Actually, I don't think we did pay him. He was through a government scheme. We worked with a coach who positioned herself as more as a personal coach than a business coach.
Okay.
Her positioning was all about entrepreneurs managing their stress.
Okay.
But we met her through a business networking group, and it was kind of like one of these things where it was kind of the dumb thing to try out each other's services and so forth. Anyway, in her first meeting, she said, I'm not going to try and work on you two personally. The way to manage your stress is to be more successful. Like you need to grow your business. So that's the only thing you're stressed about is that you've got this tiny business and you want a bigger business. And so she was a kind of did some business coaching for us. But I do remember at the time we must have been, I think we did have employees, but the whole company was probably 3 or 4 people. And she said, how big do you want this company to be? And we kind of bounced some ideas back and forth, and we said, we could envisage one day, we kind of counted individual roles that we were thinking about hiring. Yep. We could do with a designer, and maybe we'll have another account manager and these kind of things. And we said, we could imagine maybe one day having 6 or even 8 people in this business. Now, our business, when we sold it, was 50. So that tells you probably more about our terrible forecasting and whatever. But it was kind of interesting that we didn't come in with in a sense, the oversized pipe dream. We almost had to build our ambition the other way around and prove to ourselves that certain things were possible before we grew the next stage of the ambition. So that was the thing that sticks in my mind from her. And then we worked for many years with a guy called John Varney, who was a kind of non-exec advisor. In fact, he was the only person who ever invested in Distilled from the outside. So we were at the time when we sold the business earlier this year, it was majority owned by Duncan and I. A bunch of our early employees and kind of senior team had small bits of equity, and John was the only person who'd ever bought equity other than having had options granted through the business or whatever. So he was a small minority shareholder, but still he was the one guy who made a pure financial play on it. And so we did have various advisors who were super helpful over the years. That's
amazing. So in terms of like growing up, right? Did you ever dream of like owning your own company? Like, was this always one of your, because you saw from your dad what it was all about, right? You probably...
Yes. I probably wouldn't describe it as a dream so much as more like a default, actually. Okay. It was more like I assumed that's what would happen.
That's amazing.
And I think what I didn't have, possibly because of that, was I didn't have it wasn't very specific. Some people have I have a dream to have this kind of business. I've always wanted to have my own, whatever it might be. Whereas I think for me in particular, I can't speak to Duncan on this, but for me, it was like, no, I will be running a business. I don't know what it will do. I don't know what industry it will be in, but that's what I will end up doing. And so, I had a couple of kind of small entrepreneurial ventures, in my teens, that were like, never made a lot of money, but maybe made kind of the equivalent money that I could have made waiting tables or that kind of thing. And I think that is entirely a feature of my early childhood, essentially. I remember my dad being a lot happier working for himself than going out to work every day. He sheltered me in the early days from a lot of the ups and downs, but then as I grew up, I did get to see more of the what the entrepreneurial journey looked like.
Yeah.
But I remember even from, I mean, some of my earliest memories, I remember as a, probably about the age my kids are now. So like preteen, definitely practicing maths by adding up checks and like balancing his checkbook.
Yeah.
Which was obviously a thing you had to do back then, and working up to being able to do that on my own without supervision, so that he would, without being checked and so forth, and going and paying in checks and working on the banking side of things. I remember stuffing envelopes, the equivalent of email marketing back in the day, literally folding and stamping and addressing and all that kind of stuff. So those are some of my earliest memories. So it's kind of unsurprising, I suppose. Anyway.
So what's old is new again, because email marketing is bombarded, as you know. Like, I just feel there's so much going on in terms of digital. It's interesting, the world we're living in today. So tell me some of the challenges that you kind of faced over the last, I would say, growing your agency to then selling it. And can you think of like some major mistakes that you could have prevented, or things that you can maybe share with the audience members, and maybe how you overcame them?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first thing I would say is, so I remember a piece of advice that we got in, I don't know, it was probably our first year of business, was our accountant said, you should try and pay, one of your goals should be to pay more tax every year. Right. And obviously no business person likes to hear that their taxes are going up. But of course what you meant was, that means
you're earning more. Yeah.
Right. So, and I think the same thing applies to mistakes, that we joked that our mistakes got bigger and bigger. So, the mistake that in our early years was a $100 mistake, at some point became $1,000 mistake. At some point it was a $10,000 mistake. And, then I think we had a $100,000 mistake. I don't think I've yet had $1 million mistake, but, or at least not in one go. But yeah, so I think the $100,000 mistake was on the conferences side. We'd been running conferences in London for a few years by this point, and we'd run a handful in the US. I don't remember how many. And we wanted to run a West Coast conference, and we set out to run one in San Francisco. We'd never been to San Francisco, and we did many things wrong, including picking a location that wasn't actually in San Francisco. It was in Berkeley, and we didn't really kind of know enough about the location or the geography or whatever else. Also, it was a super saturated, like we probably couldn't have picked a worse city to try and run an event in. It was very expensive, even though we weren't in downtown San Francisco. Many other things went wrong. Anyway, long story short, we never ran that conference. We canceled it a few weeks out because we'd only sold a couple of dozen tickets, I think. And the most tangible mistake we made actually was not any of those things. It was not paying enough attention to the cancellation dates in our contracts for various venues and fixed costs and so forth. And I think we missed by one day. If we cancelled literally a day earlier, we'd have saved, that wasn't 100,000 in one fell swoop, that was tens of thousands. We'd basically got our deposit back, or most of it. Was it a time zone issue? No, we just, we didn't have that date as a significant thing in our head. We'd been discussing back and forth, should we run this event? Should we push it through? Should we run a small event? Should we downscale it? Do we think we're going to sell more tickets in the last couple of weeks? It was all this kind of back and forth. And we just didn't have in our heads, we need to cancel by Wednesday if we're going to, kind of thing. And nobody had paid enough attention to the operational side of that. So that was an expensive lesson. I'm not sure there's a ton of transferable knowledge to be gained from that. We don't regret taking those risks or doing those things. We eventually did run a successful West Coast event. We used to run until pre-pandemic, and we will be back to running in San Diego, which is fantastic. Nice. I love San Diego. I just missed out on the trip this year. The conference was supposed to be on I think it was 25th and 26th, or 26th and 27th of March this year.
Early March.
And so I was in Seattle, I think on the 8th, 9th of March, something like that. That was my last US trip. I flew home. Everybody was hand sanitizing and all those kind of things, but nobody was wearing masks yet. And and got back, and the next week we postponed our San Diego. So I've missed out on my beach trip this year, which I'm very disappointed by. But yeah, so I think that's kind of an example of a mistake, I suppose, or like an oversight, I suppose, that was like literally a moment where you could say, if I literally had done that instead of this, it would have gone differently. Everything else I think is a little bit more subtle. So I think, actually probably the closest to $1 million mistake is in 2013, 2014, we were scaling as a business. Distilled had been, we'd had multiple years where a whole bunch of things had lined up nicely and gone really well. So going back to maybe 2008 or so, where we'd had nice revenue growth, and then 2009 we started the conferences. 2010 we opened up in Seattle. 2011 we opened up in New York. 2012 we launched Distilled U, our online training platform. And 2013, 2014, we'd had some of our best revenue growth ever. Yep. And maybe hubris, maybe inexperience, maybe it could have been the right thing and it just didn't work out. I don't know. We started somehow thinking that was inevitable and that we should be planning for the next phase of growth. I think we started talking more about planning for growth than causing growth, driving growth. And we hired for the next phase, right? We staffed up a sales team. We hired a whole bunch of people. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think we added 19 people in over some, I can't remember what the time period was. And the company grew to the biggest. In fact, we never got back to that headcount again. And honestly, it had too many people. Like it got a bit flabby. It got like a bit confused who was doing what role. There was a bit too much overlap. It wasn't well structured. And and then the growth didn't come. So that next year, that was probably the roughest year that we ever had. Was somehow even worse than, global financial crisis was a slowdown for us, 2008, 2009, in new business. But actually our revenue grew through those years. As in, new business took longer to close than it had been, but I think we closed some bigger contracts, managed to hang on to retainers. Like actually those years were fine for us. I think 2014, 2015 was our darkest moment. And I can't point to one single thing. I think that was just a whole set of mistakes, which I can't say we never made again. Like we had a similar-ish moment in kind of, but more constrained, more to specific teams or those kinds of things later, where we started talking about how we would, like I said, I think as soon as you start thinking about planning for rather than causing growth, that was the mindset shift that hurt us then. And I think it took us years to kind of get out of that kind of funk, because when we hit that wall and retrenched, that was our first ever year-over-year decline in revenue. And that was a big kind of confidence knock, to have gone that many years growing every year, consistently growing, and trying to get back to that again. And we did get back to growing again, but it took us a little while to rebuild that the organizational confidence as much as personal confidence.
I think hearing you, it sounds like you and Duncan gelled very well together, right? Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I admire from a lot of people that are in a journey, like an entrepreneurial journey, with a partner, right? Someone that they can trust, confide with, and actually get along and have the same sort of goals and aspirations. Like I look at my journey, and I started this SEO career 7 years ago. I've been a solopreneur, right? With a team behind me, but I don't have anyone to really bounce off ideas with, right? So for me, it's like, I would love someone, but now that I'm so in it deep, I'm joining a lot of communities, I'm learning, but it's slower progression, right? And then I'm wondering, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, but it fits my lifestyle. So I'm like, slow and steady wins the race. I enjoy the momentum and growth. Even though growth is nice, it's the right clients I'd rather be working with. I would choose lifestyle because, again, you have a family, I have a family. Growth isn't everything for everyone, right?
Totally.
And for me, I'm like, I always hear and I see this from a lot of agencies, and they're like, once you get to a certain point, you want to sell it, exit, move on to the next thing, right? But then what do they do? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you've been putting your heart and soul into something for so long, you kind of don't have that same sort of drive and motivation and passion anymore, right? For your next thing, because you have to start all over again. So that's where I'm like wondering, I know you sold this company that you kind of spent a lot of time building. What pushes you now? Like what motivates you?
So it's really interesting, actually. I think everybody's journey is different, and you're absolutely right that I think the main thing is you need to do what's right for you. And yes, not everybody has the clarity to be able to see what that is in advance. Sometimes you have to go down some dead ends and turn around and come back. But that should be the North Star. I think I was really lucky that the way this deal panned out, and it was kind of a unique opportunity for us because it didn't mean walking away and starting from scratch. And nor did it mean selling a business that I was embedded in and having the kind of obligation that was my life for the next 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be. So what we did was we'd had this software product, the platform that's now called Searchpilot, which we'd been building up within Distilled. So it was an R&D project initially within Distilled. And actually Duncan had moved into that team entirely a few years earlier and kind of gone back to his product and engineering roots. And we'd been building that first as an R&D project. Can we do this thing? Then as a early commercial experiment, will anybody pay for this thing? And then it was kind of obvious that, they will. And so we were running it as a business unit within Distilled, and it had its own P&L, its own team, those kinds of things, which made it, I was going to say easy to spin out. It wasn't easy to spin out. It was very, very hard to unpick all the pieces, but it made it possible to spin this out as an independent company. So Searchpilot spun out of Distilled, owned by the shareholders of Distilled, and then we sold the rest of Distilled. So we sold the consulting and conferences business, and my wife. So obviously, through all these kind of things, you second guess yourself, right? You think, is this a good deal? Is this the deal we should be doing? Is this right for us? And I remember a conversation we had at home where we were talking about the differences on these different kinds of deals, and Heather, my wife, said, I think this is better for you than a deal where you sold the whole thing, because you'd be a nightmare. and the fact that I had both Duncan and I had the Searchpilot thing, which crucially wasn't actually starting from scratch, right? Although there was a lot of that, yes, we had to register to file our taxes and find a new accountant, and do a lot of those kind of early stage things. We didn't have to find our first customer. We didn't have to find our first team member. We didn't have to find offices on day one. All of those kind of things we'd actually done a lot of that kind of already. And so, for me personally, I haven't struggled at all, weirdly. I worried that maybe I would, but I haven't struggled at all with that kind of motivation or drive since we did the deal. But I think part of that is down to, it was a deal perfectly shaped and suited to my temperament. I wanted to go into the next thing. I didn't want it to be from scratch. It was the right stage. And so, I don't know. If I haven't been in that situation of kind of having sold the whole thing, I imagine that must be a very different, kind of experience.
Yeah, I think support, right? Not only from Duncan and your wife and people that really truly know you, right? They know how you're going to be once you exit, or if you find something, or if you will ever find something as you have right now, right? Like, will you still have that drive, passion, motivation to continue pursuing whatever you want to do, right?
Yeah.
And I think the key is finding people that really know you, right? And that you can trust, that will rely on you, because you yourself, like myself, I'm very determined. I'm very business owner kind of mentality of, it'd be nice to grow and whatever, but I don't really have that clarity of what's next, right? And that's the biggest challenge as an entrepreneur. Yes, you get to certain stages, you grow, you scale, you whatever, and then you try to understand, like, do you want to exit or continue it? Is it a lifestyle business, or do you want to cash out and move on, right?
Yep.
If you're successful enough to even move on and sell the business, because not a lot of people even understand that whole side of things, right? But do you enjoy what you're doing? Like, are you happy? Are you in a good state of mind, right? Like, mindset's everything, and just enjoying that whole process.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think the one of the other things that we reminded ourselves. So I mean, the deal took 6 months, right, to end to end, and throughout that whole time, we were kind of reminding ourselves this could fall apart at the 11th hour.
Yep.
I know so many people who have had deals fall through, in many cases, like literally at the kind of signing stage. And so I didn't want to be in a position where we were desperate to sell, or, I very much wanted, if it ever was going to happen, it had to happen at a time when we were okay for the answer to be, no, we'll just carry on running this thing. This is good. This is fine. Rather than running away from something. But the flip side is, yes, we had been doing it for 15 years, and I felt like I could see a horizon to where I didn't want to be doing that forever.
Yeah.
And so that felt like I was definitely still enjoying it at the time, and I've been enjoying what we've done since. But I'm glad. I feel like the timing worked well in that sense. Like it was good to have that moment come before I got to the point of feeling like this is a thing I want to get out of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's good to self-reflect, right? To figure out like where you're at in terms of your life stage, right? If you're married, or if you're kids, or you're single, right? Mm-hmm. And depending on where you're at, we'll have, different outcomes, right? In terms of choice. And a lot of people have to be understanding of where they're at and what motivations you have at certain aspects of life, right? Like, life stages are so critical, and just be self-aware. And I'm glad that you're like mentally clear as well. Like, you are focused. You're a business owner that I admire, because you have full sense of control on. And
it looks like that.
but that's the thing. Like, even though inside you feel like you're a mess, and I do too, you act like you know your stuff, and that's important, right? Like this is the first time we're speaking, but for me, it sounds like you are ultimately in control of your life, and a lot of people aren't, right?
Yeah,
and I admire that.
I definitely think there is something to the idea that accepting the fact that it's always going to feel, there's always going to be a difference between the way you feel and the way you're perceived, and it's okay to be on a journey for that as well. Like, you don't have to have all of the answers today. I don't know how much of that is learnt, taught, developed, or just kind of innate, but I think it does tie into the enjoying the game element as well. Like, I think one of the other things that's helped me is getting a sense of perspective.
Yes.
Of trying to be. It's funny. My team, actually, people who've left many years ago, still joke about we landed a contract with Amazon in, I don't even remember, 2007, 2008. And one of our team worked with us then. She was one of our very first hires, worked with us all the way through till a year or two ago. So was with us for many, many years. And she said she never saw me as happy or celebrate any kind of business thing to the extent I did that one contract that was only for £10,000 or something. It wasn't even a big contract all those years before. And it was interesting that I think she was right. That I learned to somewhat smooth off the highs and the lows. And as I said, that sounds like a depressing thing, but actually it's very helpful, I think, to be able to smooth off the lows. And I think the only way you do that is by accepting that, like, broadly speaking, none of these things are ever as good as they seem on day one, or ever as bad as they seem on day one. Yeah. And so having the kind of patience to see how it plays out is part of it, and has helped me in general, I think, enjoy that journey and just kind of take the highs and lows as they come.
And I love the fact that you're always referring to relative, right? Where it's good perspective on where you're at and where you started with. And it's also self-fulfilling, right? Because you don't want to compare with others. And that's what a lot of people do, right? They're always chasing and they always feel like there's that other company who is maybe a little bit higher or greater, they're more branded.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to have everything figured out and you're chasing them. Don't do that, all right? Like, you know what you can control. And that's where I've learned as well. Like, since day one with my agency, it's like, I don't care what other people are doing. I just want to get better. I want to improve the quality of my staff, my service, my systems, my processes, and get good results. Ultimately, take care of clients, like just fundamental stuff, right? And people forget about that. And they're like, I want to be that biggest brand out there. I want to be that well-known global whatever recognition, right? It's again chasing more shares and likes, and that's where social media comes into play. I'm not a big advocate of social. I feel like I'm like an old school kind of guy that just takes care of fundamental stuff, and that's why, like, even with this podcast, I don't care how popular it is, if it's not or it is. I just enjoy people's company. Is that okay? I don't know, but I'm enjoying the process. And I've been doing 200 plus episodes. I'm probably not even that popular. It's fine. I enjoy our company, Will, and that's why I love it, right?
There's a lot for that. Like the not only enjoying the process, but also enjoying the result for its own sake. So enjoying the value that you get from having made something good. In your it sounds terrible, in your own opinion.
Exactly.
You feel fulfilled in the production of that. Yeah, I don't know. And that's another one where I like anyone else, I'm sure, suffer from jealousy sometimes, or looking at somebody else and thinking, I need to achieve what they are. I try and funnel that back into the productive. So try and funnel that back into, like, okay, that's great. Like, fine.
Good for them.
But now what are you going to do about it? If you want your business to be better at that thing, or more famous for that thing, or whatever it might be, like, the motivation can come from many places. It can come from inside you. It can come from extrinsic stuff. It can come from many places. But trying to make it a positive thing rather than a thing that eats you up is I don't know. I think that's probably the more important part. So certainly something that I've tried to cultivate over the years.
Yeah, but I'm loving this conversation because it's more authentic. And we've never scripted anything, and this is more about just having a great conversation with Will and his journey, right? So I know we're running short on time. I just have a couple other questions I wanted to ask you. Currently, so what motivates you today versus what motivated you a couple years ago? Like, what's your real true passion now?
Interesting. I don't know that it's changed that much, actually. I think the thing that I have got the most out of over the decades has been all of the careers that we've played some small part in building. Right. So, and that spans everything from the folks who joined us as analysts, who are now leadership in one company or the other, in Searchpilot or Brain Labs that acquired Distilled, through to the people who worked with us for a couple of years, and we were a jumping off point that led them to be able to go and get a massive job that they couldn't have got without that experience. And feeling like being able to play some small part in many people's lives in that way that's been a thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. And that hasn't really changed. And that's kind of actually a core part of the values of Searchpilot. One of the things we've done this year is kind of thinking about our mission and vision. And the mission is obviously very business focused. What do we want this business to achieve for itself and for its customers? But the rounding out of the vision was about, needs to be somewhere where we're creating great careers. We're making amazing jobs. And that for me personally has been an ongoing driver. I think probably if I had to say what's changed, it's just that, and this was partly deliberate with the way we structured the deal and so forth, was with Distilled, we'd been building it for 15 years, and it was we were all in we're very undiversified. We're all invested in that. So a big part of it was about creating stability, about creating, maintaining things for the whole team, maintaining that kind of capability. Whereas I think with Searchpilot, it's much more saying, this time around we can shoot for bigger. We can shoot for, I guess, kind of take more risks in a sense. Although I think they're quite measured in many ways, because we've kind of been around that block once already.
That's awesome, man. Like I just feel so happy for you, because it's like you're finding your place, right? And it's been that journey, right?
It's definitely been a great journey, and I've again, the way that we kind of structured things, it didn't feel like the end of the book. It felt like the end of a chapter, and I'm kind of enjoying the next chapter. So that's good.
And then what about like your major pillars today? Like it sounds like you're enjoying time with family.
That's been the silver lining of this year, I think, is eating dinner with the kids every day, going on in the summer, especially when it was light for more of the day, being able to go on bike rides during the week with the kids, that kind of stuff. That's been a big part of it. I think the pillars that have dropped away, unfortunately, have been I've managed to get just about enough exercise. I've taken up cycling again, but basketball's fallen by the wayside because team sports aren't really happening right now. We had managed a week or two in September when things were briefly better, and friends, I suppose, they're on the end of Zoom, but it's not quite the same. And so that balance is out of whack, but such is life, and we'll rebuild it again.
I love talking to a fellow SEOer, because we're all givers in this community. The ones that are ethical, anyways, the ones that are doing things the right way and honest, right? And that's where I feel like this SEO community, we're different than a lot of other companies, because a lot of them are like cutthroat. They're like really, really in it for themselves. They don't really care, and they're ruthless, I would say, right? Even some big brands, right? Where they don't care and they're going to do whatever it takes. For us, we're all about trying to enhance our employees, other colleagues, and support one another, right? Because we're in it to help others. This is what SEO is about, right? So I love this community, and you get to meet some great people behind it, right? And that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast, really just to let people in on us as humans and being real about the journey, right? And it might not be for everyone. It's fine, right?
Yep, absolutely.
But I love this interview. Thanks a lot. How do some of the audience members get a hold of you or your, social handles, your company?
For me personally, Twitter is where I'm most active. So at Will Critchlow on Twitter. You can at me there, DM me there, find my contact details there. And for the company side of things, it's at Searchpilot. You can find us there, and obviously on the web at searchpilot.com.
Well, thanks a lot, Will. I really had a good time.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Take care.